Namaste. Blessings on this day of international celebration of yoga. Speaking as a yogi, I feel called to express the reality of the importance of this day. It is fitting that the world is coming to recognize the importance of yoga, because yoga has the power to enable the world to change its destiny. This is because the ancient wisdom of yoga enables the serious practitioner to attain the liberation of consciousness. And there is nothing more powerful than liberated consciousness to affect the destiny of the world in the most positive way. And when there are enough yogis who are aligned with that vibrational frequency of the highest state of consciousness, then the goal of yoga, which word itself means union, the unity of the world, will take place. And that unity will bring huge waves of divine love into the world. And intuitive wisdom and creative potential will be activated in such a way that a new renaissance becomes effectively mobilized into manifestation. To enter into yoga in the true sense requires an initiation into the understanding that there are higher levels of consciousness than that which pertains to the ego. But access to those higher states for any length of time without using substances that bring one down and that have other negative effects, but to expand and deepen consciousness to those levels beyond which any substances can take one, requires the sacrifice of the ego. That is the rite of passage into yoga. Those who are willing to sacrifice the ego, to go through the ordeal of death and rebirth, gain all the potencies of consciousness that are inconceivable and unimaginable to the limited ego mind. It is this power, once harnessed, that enables extraordinary and miraculous events to occur. Because the yogi knows that all that is consciousness. The world itself is made of consciousness. And once the highest levels of consciousness are attained, then the entirety of the cosmos is recognized as a single consciousness, a single being, and its harmony with itself, free of conflict, free of war, free of illness, free of all forms of pathology and suffering, can manifest without obstruction. And thus, those who have the courage to transcend the ego mind and to let go of all of its enmeshments, its karma, its attachments, and enter into the next highest state of soul consciousness, are faced with the encounter with all those depths of the heart that have not yet been reached. And the heart must be opened and freed and cleansed of all its impurities that have become encrusted within the sanskaras of the heart over many lifetimes. But once those have been cleansed, released, purified by the flow of the divine light, the Shakti, the power that descends and emanates from the highest source of consciousness, then the attention dissolves the soul as well and enters into that higher dimension of Atman, or the pure spirit. And from there into the realization of God consciousness. Yoga cannot actually be spoken about because the words themselves, without the experience, cannot fully carry the significance that they truly have. One cannot understand God consciousness until one has entered into it and merged with it. And this cannot be done until the mind has gained the power of silence. It is only when the yogi has disciplined the consciousness to such an extent that the 0 point of absolute stillness of mind has been established, that the Supreme Presence can be attained in the final letting go of all frames of reference, of all identity. In absolute surrender to the Absolute Self. It is this that brings the power of yoga into the world in its true state. And because the world consists at an elemental level of a quantum wave function that responds to the most coherent signals of consciousness itself. It reconfigures itself in accord with the absolute beauty, intelligence, and will that emanates with perfect love throughout infinite space and time. It is this attainment in which liberation is not the outcome for a single individual, but for the realization by the whole, by the entire unified quantum field. That brings about a shift in the nature of reality itself. That cannot be conceived by any lower level of consciousness. But it has no limits. And so the only qualifications to become a yogi are to have that love for infinite, absolute consciousness and the willingness to give all, to attain that level of your own being. And to do that, one must be willing to never look back and to never come down. It is the great sages and saints and avatars of the past who were models of that truth and power, who have been the lights to the world through this period of darkness that is now coming to an end. But the reappearance of God is a shift in the quantum wave function that is brought about by those who have made their bodily vehicles instruments for the rooting and the transmission of that vibrational frequency of transcendental union. Which makes the self and the world and God a single whole. It is this realization of victory over all illusion, all differences, all separation, all otherness, all lack, all identification with the creature rather than the creator. All limitations upon the boundlessness and freedom of absolute presence. That can only be brought about by those whose love for all that is, and whose yearning to bring an end to the suffering of all who labor under such illusions. Recognize that it is our duty to liberate the self that is all from the collective chains that have brought the world into such a state of suffering that the collectivity calls out for the return of the presence of God. All believers of all religions, all philosophies, all esoteric practices seek this same goal. All are forms of yoga. But this cannot be attained through mere belief or prayer or rituals or ceremonies or celebrations of any derivative nature. But only through the absolute silencing of all levels of the consciousness that are still separate from God. And the complete unification of consciousness. Upon that 0 point, that is the Holy of Holies, our supreme beingness, Allah, the One Self, the Tao, the Buddha mind, that all have pointed to. And yet few have had the courage and the intense discipline required to achieve the goal of the spiritual quest. But it is now at this moment of historic planetary crisis that there is no other alternative for humanity than to return to the source of power that alone can transform the consciousness of every being. May you take your place among those who are part of the emanation of this highest vibrational frequency of light, of love, of power, of goodness, of divine beauty, of egolessness, that will restore our world to new and higher forms of life. May all achieve the blissful realization of God consciousness as your birthright, your true nature, and the redemption of the soul that had been lost in Maya, in illusion, in ignorance of its real self. May you all attain the freedom, the peace, the salvation that you long for through the inner unity with the source of your being. This is yoga. Namaste.